Sergeant Major William Thompson adjusted his military uniform one last time before entering Heathrow Airport. After 25 years of faithful service to the Crown, he wore his medals with quiet pride. The Distinguished Service Medal gleamed on his chest alongside ribbons that told stories of courage in Afghanistan and Iraq. His polished boots clicked against the terminal floor as he made his way to the check-in counter. William had served as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace for the past 8 years. His dedication was legendary among his peers. Rain or shine, he stood at his post with unwavering discipline. Tourists often tried to make him smile or break his composure, but William remained steadfast. His commitment to duty had earned him recognition from senior officers, and even a commendation from the royal family themselves. Today marked the beginning of his first vacation in 3 years. His daughter Sarah was getting married in Scotland, and he had saved every penny to make this trip special. The wedding was in 2 days, and Sarah had specifically requested that her father wear his dress uniform during the ceremony. She wanted everyone to see how proud she was of him. At the airline counter, William presented his ticket and passport to the young clerk. The woman barely looked up from her computer screen as she processed his information. Her name tag read Jessica, and she appeared to be having a difficult day. She glanced at William's military appearance with what seemed like annoyance rather than respect. "Checking any bags today?" Jessica asked in a monotone voice, still not making eye contact. William nodded and lifted his carefully packed garment bag, containing his ceremonial dress uniform. Every crease was perfect, every medal positioned exactly as regulations required. This uniform meant everything to him, representing decades of service and sacrifice. "That'll be £50 for the bag," Jessica announced, finally looking at William. Her eyes briefly scanned his medals before returning to her screen. William felt a slight surprise at the fee but reached for his wallet without complaint. He understood that airline policies applied to everyone, regardless of their service record. As he counted out the money, William noticed other passengers in the queue behind him. A businessman in an expensive suit was already showing signs of impatience, checking his gold watch repeatedly. A family with young children struggled with multiple suitcases while trying to keep their toddlers from running away. The atmosphere in the terminal was typical of any busy travel day. William handed over the payment and received his boarding pass. Gate 23B, seat 14C. He thanked Jessica politely, despite her continued indifference, and made his way towards security. His military training had taught him to treat everyone with respect, regardless of how they treated him. This principle had guided him through countless challenging situations during his service career. The security line moved slowly, giving William time to reflect on his upcoming trip. He thought about Sarah as a little girl, always so excited when he returned from deployments. She would run to greet him in her school uniform, her pigtails bouncing as she threw her arms around his neck. Now she was about to become a married woman, and he felt the familiar mixture of pride and nostalgia that comes with such milestones. After clearing security, William found a quiet corner near his gate and called Sarah to confirm his travel plans. Her voice bubbled with excitement as she described the final wedding preparations. The flowers had arrived that morning, and the venue looked absolutely perfect. She reminded him to bring his medals and told him how much it meant to her that he would be there in uniform. As William ended the call, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Despite the challenges and sacrifices of military life, moments like these made everything worthwhile. His service had provided stability for his family and given him a sense of purpose that few people ever experience. The medals on his chest weren't just pieces of metal. They represented years of dedication, brotherhood, and unwavering loyalty to his country. Little did William know that his journey was about to take an unexpected turn. The airline staff's treatment of him would soon become the catalyst for a series of events that would draw attention from the very highest levels of British society. His quiet dignity in the face of disrespect would ultimately lead to an encounter that would change not only his own perspective but also highlight the importance of honoring those who serve their country with distinction. The boarding process began 30 minutes later than scheduled, causing anxiety among passengers eager to reach their destinations. William joined the queue patiently, understanding that delays were common in air travel. His military background had taught him to remain calm during unexpected situations, and he used this time to mentally prepare for the emotional wedding ceremony ahead. When William reached the aircraft entrance, he presented his boarding pass to the flight attendant. The woman, whose name tag identified her as Rachel, scrutinized the document with unusual intensity. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that suggested she took great pride in her appearance. However, her expression remained cold and unwelcoming. "You're in seat 14C, Rachel announced curtly, pointing toward the middle of the aircraft. William thanked her and began walking down the narrow aisle, carefully maneuvering his small carry-on bag. The plane was nearly full, with passengers settling into their seats and stowing their belongings in the overhead compartments. As William approached row 14, he discovered that his assigned seat was in the middle position between two other passengers. A large man in a business suit occupied the window seat, already spreading his belongings across both armrests. In the aisle seat, a woman with headphones was completely absorbed in her tablet, showing no awareness of her surroundings. William politely asked the woman if she could allow him to pass to his middle seat. She looked up with obvious irritation, reluctantly removing her headphones and standing to let him through. The businessman glanced at William's medals with what appeared to be mild curiosity, but made no effort to move his items from the shared armrest. Once seated, William tried to make himself comfortable in the cramped space. His broad shoulders, developed through years of military training, made the narrow seat particularly challenging. He carefully adjusted his uniform to prevent wrinkles and placed his carry-on bag under the seat in front of him. The proximity to other passengers was uncomfortable, but he reminded himself that the flight was only 2 hours long. 20 minutes after takeoff, Rachel appeared with the beverage cart. When she reached William's row, she served the businessman his requested whiskey with a warm smile and engaging conversation about his business travels. She then turned to the woman with headphones, offering various drink options with equal enthusiasm and patience. When Rachel finally acknowledged William's presence, her demeanor changed dramatically. "What do you want?" she asked with barely concealed hostility. William was taken aback by her tone but maintained his composure, politely requesting a simple coffee. Rachel's response shocked him and several nearby passengers who overheard the exchange. "We don't serve coffee to people who probably can't afford to tip properly," Rachel said loudly enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "Maybe you should have flown budget airlines instead of pretending you belong in regular seating." Her words cut through the cabin noise, causing several heads to turn in their direction. William felt his face flush with embarrassment and confusion. He had never experienced such blatant disrespect, especially regarding his financial situation. The medals on his chest represented years of service during which he had often earned less than minimum wage while risking his life for his country. The accusation that he couldn't afford proper treatment was both hurtful and completely unfounded. "I served 25 years in the military," William replied quietly, hoping to clarify any misunderstanding. "I can certainly afford coffee and would be happy to tip appropriately." His voice remained steady despite the emotional impact of Rachel's words, demonstrating the self-control that had served him well throughout his military career. Rachel laughed dismissively, drawing even more attention from nearby passengers. "Oh, so you're one of those people who thinks wearing some old medals makes you special? That's probably costume jewelry anyway. Real military people don't need to show off their fake decorations on commercial flights." The businessman in the window seat shifted uncomfortably, clearly disturbed by the flight attendant's behavior. Other passengers began whispering among themselves, some expressing disbelief at what they were witnessing. An elderly woman across the aisle shook her head in disgust, while a young couple behind William exchanged looks of shock and sympathy. William's military training had prepared him for many challenging situations, but nothing had equipped him to handle such public humiliation. The accusations about his medals being fake were particularly painful, as each one represented specific acts of courage and dedication. His Distinguished Service Medal had been earned during a rescue operation in Afghanistan that saved the lives of 3 fellow soldiers. Despite his emotional turmoil, William chose not to escalate the situation. He simply nodded and said he would do without the coffee. Rachel smirked triumphantly before moving on to serve other passengers with renewed cheerfulness. The contrast in her treatment was so obvious that several passengers began taking out their phones, though airline policies prohibited recording during flight. For the remainder of the flight, William sat in uncomfortable silence while other passengers received normal service. The businessman eventually offered to share his snacks, expressing quiet sympathy for the unfair treatment. This small gesture of kindness helped William maintain his dignity during one of the most humiliating experiences of his adult life. As the plane began its descent, William reflected on the irony of his situation. He had spent decades protecting the freedoms that allowed people like Rachel to express their opinions, even when those opinions included baseless attacks on his character and service. The very uniform that she had mocked represented his commitment to defending everyone's right to fair treatment and respect. As the aircraft touched down at Edinburgh Airport, passengers began the familiar routine of gathering their belongings and preparing to disembark. William remained seated until most others had left, partly to avoid further confrontation and partly because he needed a moment to process what had happened during the flight. The humiliation still stung, but his primary concern was ensuring that this incident wouldn't overshadow his daughter's wedding celebration. While walking through the terminal toward baggage claim, William heard footsteps behind him. The businessman from the window seat caught up with him, introducing himself as David Morrison, a corporate executive from London. David's face showed genuine concern as he asked if William was all right after the terrible treatment he had received from the flight attendant. "That was absolutely disgraceful," David said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like it in all my years of business travel. The way she spoke to you was completely unacceptable, especially considering your obvious military service." He gestured respectfully toward William's medals, acknowledging their significance in a way that Rachel had failed to do. Other passengers began approaching as they walked toward the baggage carousel. Margaret Henderson, the elderly woman who had sat across the aisle, expressed her outrage at Rachel's behavior. As a widow of a Royal Navy officer, she understood the sacrifice and dedication represented by William's uniform and medals. Her husband had served during World War II, and she found the flight attendant's disrespect personally offensive. "My late husband would have been appalled by such treatment," Margaret said with emotion in her voice. "Young people today seem to have no understanding of what military service means, or the sacrifices made by people like yourself." She asked for William's contact information, explaining that she intended to file a formal complaint with the airline about Rachel's conduct. A young couple with 2 small children also approached the growing group. James and Emma Patterson had been seated behind William during the flight and had witnessed the entire incident. As teachers, they were particularly disturbed by the discriminatory nature of Rachel's comments and her assumption about William's financial situation, based solely on his appearance. "We recorded some of the conversation on our phones before takeoff," Emma explained quietly. "We know filming during flight is prohibited, but we got the initial interaction at the gate and some audio afterward. This kind of treatment is completely unacceptable, and we want to help you seek justice if you decide to pursue this matter." William was overwhelmed by the support from these strangers who had chosen to involve themselves in his situation. His military experience had taught him about the importance of solidarity and standing up for what's right, but he hadn't expected civilians to demonstrate such courage and compassion. Their willingness to come forward as witnesses restored some of his faith in human decency. Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor of sociology who had observed the incident from several rows back, joined the conversation at the baggage claim area. She explained that Rachel's behavior represented a clear case of discrimination and potentially violated several airline industry standards regarding passenger treatment. As someone who studied social behavior professionally, she was particularly disturbed by the public nature of the humiliation. "What happened to you wasn't just poor customer service," Dr. Chen explained. "It was targeted harassment based on assumptions about your background and financial status. The fact that she questioned the authenticity of your military decorations adds another layer of severity to her misconduct." She offered to provide a detailed written statement about everything she had observed. The group of witnesses compared their observations, ensuring that their accounts were consistent and comprehensive. They documented the specific comments Rachel had made, the timing of events, and the reactions of other passengers. Several people exchanged contact information and agreed to coordinate their complaints to maximize the impact of their collective testimony. William learned that David Morrison had already spoken with a gate agent about the incident before leaving the aircraft. The agent had listened with growing concern and promised to escalate the matter to supervisory staff immediately. David had also requested the contact information for the airline's customer service department and formal complaint procedures. As they waited for luggage to arrive, Margaret Henderson shared stories about her husband's military service and the respect that servicemen and women had traditionally received from the British public. She expressed sadness that attitudes seemed to have changed and that people like Rachel felt entitled to treat veterans with such contempt. Her stories helped William understand that his experience was part of a larger social issue. The Patterson family offered to drive William to his hotel, as their rental car was large enough to accommodate his luggage. During the drive, they discussed the importance of holding Rachel accountable for her actions. They believed that her behavior likely represented a pattern rather than an isolated incident, and they wanted to prevent other passengers from experiencing similar treatment. Emma Patterson, as an educator, was particularly concerned about the message that Rachel's behavior sent to younger passengers who might have witnessed the incident. Children learn by observing adult behavior, she explained. When they see discrimination and disrespect going unchallenged, it normalizes that kind of conduct. She felt a professional obligation to ensure that appropriate consequences followed. Upon arriving at his hotel, William was surrounded by supporters who had transformed from fellow passengers into advocates for justice. They had organized themselves into an informal coalition dedicated to ensuring that his mistreatment would not be ignored or dismissed by the airline's corporate hierarchy. Their collective determination gave William hope that positive change might result from his negative experience. As the group prepared to part ways, they established a communication plan for coordinating their complaint efforts. David Morrison volunteered to research the airline's corporate structure and identify the most effective channels for filing formal complaints. Dr. Chen offered to draft a comprehensive incident report that could serve as the foundation for all their individual statements. The solidarity that had emerged from shared outrage was about to become a powerful force for accountability. Within hours of arriving at his hotel in Edinburgh, William discovered that his story was spreading far beyond the small group of passengers who had witnessed the incident. Emma Patterson, the teacher who had offered support at the airport, had shared a carefully written account of Rachel's behavior on her social media accounts. Her post included no personal information about William, but provided a detailed description of the discrimination he had faced. Emma's post began circulating among her teacher colleagues and parent networks, quickly gaining traction as people expressed outrage at the treatment of a decorated military veteran. The story resonated particularly strongly with families who had connections to military service, either through current deployments or historical family traditions. Comments poured in from across the United Kingdom and beyond, with many sharing similar experiences of disrespect towards servicemen and women. Dr. Sarah Chen had also written about the incident from her academic perspective, analyzing the broader social implications of Rachel's behavior. Her post on professional networks reached sociologists, psychologists, and human rights advocates who understood the significance of public discrimination against protected groups. The academic community's response was swift and decisive, with several prominent researchers sharing the story through their own channels. David Morrison used his extensive business contacts to bring attention to the airline's failure to maintain professional standards among their staff. His LinkedIn post about the incident reached corporate executives, travel industry professionals, and business travelers who relied on airlines for professional transportation. The business community's response was particularly concerning for the airline, as corporate contracts represented a significant portion of their revenue. Margaret Henderson, despite her advanced age, proved to be remarkably effective at mobilizing public opinion through traditional and digital channels. She contacted local newspapers in her hometown, veterans organizations, and community groups with which she had decades of involvement. Her passionate defense of William's dignity resonated with older generations who remembered when military service was universally respected. By the following morning, the story had been picked up by several regional news outlets in Scotland and England. Journalists were drawn to the human interest angle of a decorated veteran being humiliated while traveling to his daughter's wedding. The contrast between William's distinguished service record and Rachel's unprofessional Behavior created a compelling narrative that captured public attention. The hashtag, Moving Forward Together, began trending on social media platforms as people shared their own stories of discrimination and their support for military veterans. The movement grew beyond William's specific incident to encompass broader discussions about respect, dignity, and the treatment of those who serve their country. Veterans from various conflicts and service branches added their voices to the growing chorus of criticism. Television news programs picked up the story as it gained momentum online, featuring interviews with military advocacy groups and airline industry experts. The visual elements of the story were particularly powerful for television coverage, with William's medal citations and service record providing compelling evidence of his distinguished career. News anchors struggled to understand how such a respected veteran could face such treatment. The airline's social media accounts were flooded with complaints and demands for accountability. Customers began sharing their own negative experiences with airline staff, creating a pattern of poor customer service that extended far beyond William's individual case. The company's reputation was suffering significant damage as the story continued to spread and evolve. Public figures began weighing in on the controversy, with several members of Parliament expressing concern about the treatment of military veterans in civilian settings. Veterans advocacy organizations issued statements calling for better training of service industry employees regarding the recognition and respect of military service. The story had evolved from a single incident into a national conversation about values and priorities. William remained largely unaware of the growing media attention as he focused on wedding preparations with his daughter Sarah. She had noticed increased activity on her own social media accounts, with friends and extended family members sharing articles about her father's experience. Sarah was simultaneously proud of the support her father was receiving and angry that he had been subjected to such treatment in the first place. International media outlets began covering the story as it represented broader themes of social respect and discrimination that transcended national boundaries. Military families in other countries shared similar experiences, creating a global conversation about how veterans are treated in civilian society. The story resonated particularly strongly in countries with recent military conflicts. The airline's corporate headquarters was bombarded with calls from journalists seeking official statements about the incident. Customer service departments were overwhelmed with complaints and cancellation requests from passengers who refused to support a company that allowed such behavior from its employees. The financial impact was becoming increasingly apparent as the story continued to dominate news cycles. Legal experts began discussing the incident on news programs and in professional publications, analyzing potential violations of discrimination laws and passenger rights regulations. Some suggested that William's case could become a landmark example of how service industries should treat military veterans. The legal implications added another layer of complexity to what had begun as a customer service failure. As the story approached viral status, Williams' supporters organized online campaigns calling for policy changes within the airline industry. They demanded mandatory sensitivity training for airline employees, clear protocols for recognizing and respecting military service, and stronger consequences for discriminatory behavior. The grassroots movement had developed specific goals and strategies for creating lasting change. The power of social media had transformed Williams' personal humiliation into a catalyst for broader social change. What had begun as an isolated incident between one veteran and one airline employee had evolved into a national conversation about respect, dignity, and the values that society should uphold. The momentum was building toward something much larger than anyone had initially imagined. The airline's corporate headquarters in London was in complete chaos by the second day after Williams' flight. Chief Executive Officer Amanda Richardson had been pulled from her vacation in France to manage what was rapidly becoming the company's worst public relations crisis in decades. The boardroom was filled with executives, legal advisors, and public relations specialists trying to develop a strategy to contain the damage. The numbers were devastating. Social media engagement with negative content about the airline had increased by over 400% in just 48 hours. Customer service departments reported a 300% increase in complaint calls, with many customers threatening to cancel future bookings and switch to competitor airlines. The company's stock price had dropped 8% since the story broke, representing millions of pounds in lost market value. Amanda Richardson reviewed the incident reports with growing alarm. Rachel Morrison, the flight attendant at the center of the controversy, had a personnel file that revealed several previous complaints about unprofessional behavior. Passengers had reported her making inappropriate comments about their appearance, financial status, and personal choices during flights. The pattern of discriminatory behavior was clear and well documented. The legal department was particularly concerned about potential violations of the Equality Act 2010, which prohibits discrimination against individuals based on various protected characteristics, including military service. Williams' treatment could be interpreted as harassment and discrimination, opening the company to significant legal liability. Several high-profile law firms had already contacted Williams' supporters offering pro bono representation, head of human resources. Michael Thompson presented a troubling analysis of Rachel's employment history. She had been hired 3 years earlier despite failing initial personality assessments that measured empathy and customer service aptitude. Her training scores were consistently below average, and she had received multiple warnings about her attitude toward passengers. The company had failed to address obvious red flags in her behavior. The public relations team, led by Director Sarah Williams, had been monitoring social media and news coverage around the clock. The story was showing no signs of slowing down, and was actually gaining momentum as more celebrities and public figures expressed their support for William. Veterans organizations across Europe were now calling for boycotts of the airline until significant policy changes were implemented. Customer feedback was overwhelmingly negative, with many passengers sharing their own stories of poor treatment by airline staff. The incident had become a catalyst for broader criticism of the company's customer service culture and training programs. Travel review websites were flooded with one-star ratings and detailed accounts of disappointing experiences with the airline, the company's reputation. Management firm presented a comprehensive damage assessment that painted a grim picture of long-term consequences. Brand trust surveys showed a significant decline in customer confidence, particularly among the business travelers who represented the airline's most profitable customer segment. Competitor airlines were already launching marketing campaigns to attract dissatisfied customers. In an emergency session, the board of directors demanded immediate action to address both the specific incident involving William and the broader cultural issues within the company. They authorized a complete review of hiring practices, training programs, and customer service protocols. The costs of implementing comprehensive reforms would be substantial, but the alternative was potentially existential damage to the company. CEO Richardson personally called Williams' hotel to request a meeting, but he was unavailable as he was attending his daughter's wedding rehearsal. The timing of the incident, during such an important family celebration, added another layer of public sympathy for Williams' situation. The fact that he had been traveling to honor his daughter while wearing his military decorations made Rachel's behavior seem even more heartless. The airline's initial response had been woefully inadequate, consisting only of a generic statement about investigating the matter and maintaining high standards of customer service. The public reaction to this weak response was swift and brutal, with critics pointing out the company's failure to acknowledge the severity of the discrimination or express genuine remorse for Williams' treatment. Legal advisors recommended immediate termination of Rachel's employment, citing her violation of company policies regarding passenger treatment and her creation of significant legal liability for the organization. However, employment law experts warned that the termination process needed to be handled carefully to avoid additional legal complications related to wrongful dismissal claims. The marketing department was working frantically to develop a comprehensive response strategy that would demonstrate genuine commitment to change rather than mere damage control. They proposed a multi-million-pound investment in diversity and inclusion training, veteran recognition programs, and customer service improvements. The authenticity of these efforts would be crucial for restoring public trust. International aviation industry analysts were closely watching the situation as a potential case study in crisis management and corporate responsibility. The airline's handling of the incident would likely influence industry standards and best practices for years to come. Other carriers were already reviewing their own policies and training programs to avoid similar controversies. The company's insurance providers were conducting their own investigation into potential coverage for legal settlements and reputation damage. The financial implications extended far beyond immediate stock price fluctuations to include long-term impacts on revenue, market share, and operational costs. The true cost of Rachel's behavior would likely be measured in tens of millions of pounds. As pressure mounted from multiple stakeholders, CEO Richardson realized that half measures and typical corporate responses would be insufficient to address this crisis. The company needed to demonstrate fundamental changes in its culture and values, starting with immediate accountability for the individuals responsible for William's mistreatment. The question was whether these changes would come soon enough to prevent permanent damage to the airline's reputation and financial stability. Meanwhile, Rachel Morrison remained largely unaware of the global controversy surrounding her actions. She had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, but the severity of the situation was still being kept confidential while legal and HR teams developed their strategy. Her world was about to change dramatically as the consequences of her discriminatory behavior became clear. The morning of Sarah's wedding dawned crisp and clear in the Scottish Highlands, with autumn colors painting the landscape in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. William stood before the mirror in his hotel room, carefully adjusting his ceremonial dress uniform for what he knew would be one of the most important days of his life. Each medal was positioned precisely according to military protocol, representing decades of dedicated service to the crown. As William made final preparations, he remained unaware that his story had reached the highest levels of British society. At Balmoral Castle, approximately 2 hours away, King Charles III was reviewing his morning briefings when his private secretary brought the viral news story to his attention. The king's expression grew increasingly serious as he read about the treatment of one of his decorated guards. King Charles had always maintained a deep, personal connection with the military community, understanding the sacrifices made by service members and their families. As colonel-in-chief of numerous regiments and someone who had served in the Royal Navy himself, he took the welfare of military personnel very seriously. The disrespect shown to Sergeant Major Thompson was not just an insult to one individual, but to all who served with honor. The King's private secretary, Sir James Worthington, had been monitoring the developing story since it first appeared in the media. As a former military officer himself, Sir James understood the significance of the incident and its potential impact on public perception of how veterans are treated in civilian society. He had prepared a comprehensive briefing for the King, including William's distinguished service record. After reviewing the materials, King Charles made an unprecedented decision. He instructed Sir James to clear his schedule for the afternoon and arrange private transportation to the wedding venue in the Scottish Highlands. The King wanted to personally honor Sergeant Major Thompson and demonstrate the Crown's appreciation for his decades of faithful service. This would be an extraordinary gesture that would send a powerful message about the monarchy's values. Sir James immediately contacted the wedding venue to make discreet arrangements for the King's unexpected visit. The venue staff was sworn to secrecy to ensure that the surprise would not be spoiled or create unnecessary chaos during the celebration. Security arrangements were put in place quickly and efficiently, with the protection team working to minimize disruption to the wedding festivities. Meanwhile, at the wedding venue, Sarah Thompson was radiating happiness as she prepared for the ceremony. Her wedding dress was a family heirloom that had been worn by her grandmother, and she felt a deep connection to the generations of strong women who had come before her. The thought of her father walking her down the aisle in his dress uniform filled her with pride and emotion. William remained focused entirely on his daughter's special day, deliberately avoiding social media and news coverage that might distract from the celebration. His fellow royal guards who were attending the wedding had tried to brief him on the media attention, but William politely declined to discuss the airline incident. Today was about Sarah, and nothing else mattered to him. The wedding ceremony began at 2 p.m. in a beautiful stone chapel surrounded by rolling hills and ancient oak trees. William walked Sarah down the aisle with perfect military bearing, his medals catching the afternoon sunlight that streamed through stained glass windows. The congregation of family and friends was moved by the obvious love and pride evident in both father and daughter. As the ceremony concluded and guests began moving to the reception venue, Sir James arrived discreetly to speak with the wedding coordinator. He explained that a very important guest wished to congratulate the bride and groom, and asked if arrangements could be made for a brief private meeting. The coordinator, initially confused, agreed to the unusual request without understanding its significance. During the cocktail hour, while guests mingled and photographers captured family portraits, a convoy of unmarked vehicles arrived at the venue. The security team had positioned themselves strategically around the property, maintaining their presence without drawing attention to the extraordinary nature of the visit. Most guests remained unaware that anything unusual was happening. King Charles, dressed in a simple but elegant civilian suit, entered the reception venue accompanied only by Sir James and two discreet protection officers. His presence immediately transformed the atmosphere, though many guests initially failed to recognize him without his formal royal regalia. The king had specifically chosen to dress down to avoid overshadowing the bride and groom, and William was engaged in conversation with other wedding guests when Sir James approached and quietly requested a private word. Still unaware of who was visiting, William followed Sir James to a small antechamber adjacent to the main reception hall. His military instincts told him that something significant was happening, but he couldn't imagine what might require his attention during his daughter's wedding. When William entered the private room and saw King Charles waiting for him, his military training took over immediately. He came to attention and offered a crisp salute despite being in a civilian setting. The king gestured for him to relax and extended his hand in greeting, his face showing genuine warmth and respect for the veteran before him. "Sergeant Major Thompson," the king began, his voice conveying sincere appreciation, "I wanted to personally congratulate you on your daughter's wedding, and to express my profound gratitude for your 25 years of distinguished service to the crown. Your dedication and sacrifice have not gone unnoticed, and I am deeply troubled by the disrespectful treatment you recently received." William was speechless, overwhelmed by the unexpected honor of meeting his sovereign in such an intimate setting. The king's presence at his daughter's wedding was beyond anything he could have imagined, and the personal nature of the visit demonstrated a level of care and attention that touched him deeply. This gesture would transform what had been a painful experience into one of the most meaningful moments of his life. King Charles spent nearly 30 minutes in private conversation with William, discussing his military service, his family, and the values that define true service to one's country. The king shared his own experiences in the Royal Navy and expressed his deep understanding of the sacrifices made by military families. Their conversation revealed a genuine connection between two men who understood duty, honor, and commitment to something greater than themselves. "Sergeant Major," the king said, his voice filled with emotion, "what happened to you on that flight was not just an insult to you personally, but to every man and woman who has worn the uniform in service to our nation. I want you to know that your dignity, your service, and your sacrifice are deeply valued by the crown and by the people of this country." The king then asked to meet Sarah and her new husband, explaining that he wanted to personally congratulate them and acknowledge the strength of military families who support their loved ones through years of service. William, still overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation, led the king to the main reception hall where his daughter was greeting guests and posing for photographs. When Sarah saw her father approaching with an unfamiliar gentleman, she assumed he was a family friend or colleague she hadn't yet met. It wasn't until her father performed a formal introduction that she realized she was meeting the King of England at her own wedding reception. Her reaction was a perfect mixture of shock, joy, and the poise that came from being raised in a military family. King Charles congratulated the newlyweds with genuine warmth, commenting on the beauty of the ceremony and the obvious love between them. He spoke about the importance of strong marriages in supporting military service, and acknowledged the unique challenges faced by military families. Sarah was deeply moved by his words and his unexpected presence at her celebration. The king then addressed the small gathering of wedding guests, most of whom were still processing the extraordinary nature of his visit. He spoke eloquently about William's distinguished service record, the values represented by his military decorations, and the importance of treating all veterans with the respect and dignity they deserve. His words carried the weight of royal authority and genuine personal conviction. Today, we celebrate not only the marriage of Sarah and her husband, but also the service of a man who has dedicated his life to protecting the freedoms we all enjoy," the king declared. "Sergeant Major Thompson represents the very best of British military tradition. and his treatment by that airline employee was completely unacceptable and contrary to the values we hold dear as a nation. The wedding guests erupted in spontaneous applause, many wiping away tears as they witnessed this extraordinary moment of recognition and justice. Several of William's fellow royal guards who were present stood at attention out of respect for both their colleague and their sovereign. The atmosphere was electric with emotion and pride, as the significance of the king's gesture became clear to everyone present. Before departing, King Charles presented William with a personal letter of commendation, sealed with the royal seal, acknowledging his exceptional service and expressing the crown's gratitude for his dedication. The letter would become a treasured family heirloom, representing not just royal recognition but validation of a lifetime spent in service to others. William accepted the honor with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire military career. The king also announced that he would be personally ensuring that the airline faced appropriate consequences for the discriminatory treatment of military personnel. His private secretary would be contacting the company's leadership to demand policy changes and accountability measures. The royal intervention guaranteed that William's case would not be dismissed or ignored by corporate executives. As King Charles prepared to leave, he took a moment to speak privately with Sarah, expressing his hope that her father's experience would lead to positive changes in how veterans are treated throughout British society. He emphasized that military families like theirs represent the backbone of the nation and deserve recognition and respect in all circumstances. The departure of the royal convoy left the wedding guests in a state of amazed joy and celebration. What had begun as a beautiful family wedding had become a historic moment of justice and redemption. Sarah's wedding day would be remembered not just for her marriage, but for the extraordinary honor bestowed upon her father by the highest authority in the land. Within hours of the king's visit, news of his intervention spread across social media and traditional news outlets. The royal gesture transformed the narrative from one of discrimination and corporate failure to one of recognition, justice, and the enduring values of service and sacrifice. The airline's reputation crisis deepened as the public realized that their treatment of William had been so egregious that it required royal intervention. The following week, the airline announced a comprehensive overhaul of their customer service policies, mandatory sensitivity training for all employees, and the immediate termination of Rachel Morrison. CEO Amanda Richardson publicly apologized to William and announced a substantial charitable donation to veterans organizations. The company also implemented new protocols specifically designed to recognize and honor military service members. William returned to his duties at Buckingham Palace with renewed pride and purpose, knowing that his quiet dignity in the face of discrimination had sparked meaningful change. His fellow guards treated him with even greater respect, understanding that he had represented all of them with honor during a difficult situation. The medals on his chest had always represented his service to the crown, but now they also symbolized the crown's recognition of his worth. Rachel Morrison faced not only the loss of her job, but also widespread public condemnation for her discriminatory behavior. Her actions had cost her employer millions of pounds and damaged the reputation of an entire industry. The incident became a case study in business schools and human resources programs, demonstrating the devastating consequences of discrimination and poor customer service. For Sarah and her new husband, their wedding day became a story they would tell their children and grandchildren, a tale of how sometimes justice prevails and good people are recognized for their worth. The unexpected royal blessing of their marriage added a fairy tale element to their love story that would be treasured forever. William's experience ultimately led to broader changes in how airlines and other service industries treat military personnel throughout the United Kingdom and beyond. His quiet courage in the face of humiliation, combined with the support of fellow passengers and the intervention of the crown, created a lasting legacy of respect and recognition for all who served their country with honor and distinction.